Welcome to the next video about the concept of a Confederal States of Europe. Today with me I have Paris Petralis. We're continuing from the previous video. You can go there and check it out, but it's practically we're going to discuss about different specific topics of the idea of Confederal States of Europe. So you can see the intro video to understand the concept, but if you already know the concept or you're just curious about this specific video about the army and the foreign policy of a Confederal States of Europe, then stick around and see it. Each video is going to act independently from the rest. Now, getting to the video. Today, we're going to talk about the defense and the foreign policy that a Confederal States of Europe can have, the benefits and the disadvantage of such a system. Paris is here with me to ask questions and queries that the audience might have. So when it comes to defense, as I said in the last video, the biggest argument of a confederal system over a federal or national system is the fact that it's inherently not expansionary, but it's at the same time inherently very aggressively defensive as a state. Why is that is the case? Well, because if you have 40% of your states that don't want a war and 60% that want a war, the 40% just have nothing to gain from such a war. The idea is that since they have nothing to gain, neither fiscal nor land, they will just not participate in the war, and the other states are just practically not allowed to join such a war. Just outright not allowed. Maybe they would be allowed to do it in a very small case, but in a militia level. But the Confederal Army will not have the right to participate in such a war, thus restricting the ability of such granted states to be expansionary, which it's something that many Europeans truly care about. Now, why do many Europeans will care about it? Well, because in the past 30 years, we have been embroiled in a ton of American wars all around the globe. And as a consequence, we are suffering suicide attacks and terror attacks all across Europe for political gains that Europe has gotten nothing out of. Why? Because of American foreign policy. Europe has nowhere to expand anyways at this point. We don't want a war with anyone. We just want to live peacefully and want every single person in the world to just trade with us. Now, if a state wants to signal virtue other countries, it will have the fiscal and monetary ability to boycott them. Yeah, sure, but it won't be enforced upon all the states. The idea is that each state can decide upon itself what it wants to do. But when it comes to a defensive war, and that's a different thing, in the difference with a federal and national state, in a defensive war, you're going to have the Confederal Army, which will be the command under common generals to go and defend it, and then you're going to have the state militias. Because each individual is voting within his state, and because each state is going to be smaller than the grander state, my opinion is that it will have the feeling of having more connection to its own state, and that will automatically imply a bigger willingness to defend its state. Thus, that individual will be a much better fighter and more willing to go and fight and defend the Confederacy against foreign threats. Now, Barry, in regards to that topic, yes.
So I just have a question in regards to what you said about the defense aspect of the Confederacy. If we take Europe, for example, as a state, as a confederal state, and take the geography of Europe, naturally we have some states such as Poland, potentially Poland,
Hungary, Estonia, Latvia,
and Latvia, Czech Republic, being considered as satellite states. How will you balance that innate threat that those states have being on the satellite of the Confederacy compared to states such as Portugal, which do not have any natural threats from enemies or
from natural enemies?
Natural enemies, yeah. How do you balance that threat that Poland has, for example, compared to Portugal, in terms of obviously Poland will need a much higher percentage of that budget for defense from the Confederacy, or a much higher percentage of the actual armaments and army guarding Poland.
That here is the beauty in contrast to current NATO and the current EU. If you have a confederal state, then where will be all of the army based? Not in Germany, not in France, and definitely not in Portugal. All of the army will be based to begin with on its bloody borders. So the Confederate army being based in Germany or in France will provide no protection whatsoever. The same reason that the Confederate Navy being based on the Northern Sea will also provide very little protection. So the first benefit is the fact that if you have a Confederate army, in contrast to what we have right now, all of that Confederate army will be on the borders. Now, the benefit of this, the economic benefit, is that yes, the states on its borders will get the benefit, the economic benefit of having all of these soldiers just standing there and eating from that country and thus giving economic benefit to that country. The irony is, and the beauty of the way that Europe currently is structured, the biggest economies of Europe are in the center. So the economies are getting money from that Confederate army, so win for them, and the more poorer states of Eastern and Southern Europe get the actual soldiers living there, so more expenditure power on those states. So a win-win situation. Outside of the economics, the military part. Firstly, in contrast to the way that Europe it is right now, Europe right now doesn't fucking care about the individual protection of states. We've seen that both as Cypriots, when Turkey makes aggressive moves against the island, when Turkey practically breaks Casus Belli when it directly intervenes into Cypriot airspace and naval sea, and when it shoots artillery pieces on the Green Line and a clear acts of war, Europe just practically does nothing, doesn't care about it. If you have a confederal state, then all of the states are obliged to defend the other states. Now, the third argument why the Confederacy will work when it comes to defense is who is going to bloody attack the biggest economy in the world with the biggest population concentration of the biggest economy in the world, even if we are second. Let's say we unify tomorrow, okay, and Russia attacks. And Estonia loses some ground, Latvia loses some ground, and so forth. Within 1 year, with the economies of Europe, if you see, for example, Ukraine today, you can mobilize such a massive army that there is no state in the world that will dare to attack such a superstate. And the idea is that since we are not aiming for an expansionary war like the US does, so we don't really care about having the military capabilities to strike anywhere in the world, but we only care about defense. So the types of weapons we are choosing to defend ourselves are tactical weapons, artillery pieces, light tanks, general tanks, assault rifles, and so forth. The expenditure cost of such an army will be much smaller than the current US Army, but much bigger in size. And if someone will dare to attack such a state, the economic and the military devastation that was going to be bring upon that state would be devastating. And the thing is, the only state that actually doesn't have a chance, but it has even close enough the army to do so is Russia, which has proven otherwise because it's losing in Ukraine, with a country with less than 50 million and a non-existent economy. So no, Poland and the Baltics have practically nothing to fear of. In a confederal state, which will imply those states being more stronger militaristically, who else is going to attack? And let's assume that the Ukraine war wouldn't have happened. Russia was doing a big trade with the EU, and ironically enough, it still does. So Russia doesn't actually have a lot of incentive to attack Europe itself. And who else is going to attack? Libya? Egypt? Well, Turkey attacking Greece and Cyprus is a possibility, but that's one of the reasons that Cyprus and Greece would love to be part of a confederacy. But that's the thing, that's George Washington said. The concept of having a large army by itself, or at least the potential of creating a large army by itself, acts as a deterrent of a possible attack to your state. And that's the beauty of it. The fact that only just by being this big nation state, but still independent, but still big one, We don't need the army. It's just the sheer scale of the potential of our army makes us a credible threat to the enemy. For example, the Japanese in World War II, thinking, okay, the Americans have a very small army and almost non-existent navy. Let's just start attack them, and then by the time they're gonna get ready, it's just gonna lose the war. They have 12 aircraft carriers prior to the start of the war. The Americans, by the end of the war, they're producing more than 50 carriers a year. And Europe, it's exactly that, but with a much bigger population, almost twice the size. So no one who has the integrity or authority or the ability to attack such a massive state, but also gives you the ability of smaller states to be protected. For example, the current migration crisis. The question I always ask Europeans and pro-Europeans, I am a pro-European, but still, what is the Dutch and German Navy doing in the North Sea? Who are they getting protected from? From themselves? Is the Dutch Navy protecting itself from Germany when at the same time they don't have a border between their countries? What's the point of the Swedish, the German, and the Dutch Navy sitting in the North Sea? It's absolutely retarded. Why are they not in the Mediterranean? It makes practically no sense. Britain definitely is not going to attack Europe because, nor the economy that relies economically on Europe, and not the army nor the navy to do so. So what's the point of doing the whole navy of Europe being in the North Sea?
So essentially, what you're saying. So back to say with the deterrence. So the Confederacy the military aspect of the Confederacy will sort of act like Article 5 of NATO, in the sense that an attack on one is an attack on everybody. So
yes, even greater than NATO.
Even greater than NATO. So
any attack whatsoever, even a terror attack, will cause an immediate retaliation. And the idea is, as I proposed prior, is to have some very absolute protections of property rights. That will imply that even if a terror attack happens from a known state, sure, we're going to invade that state? No, I'm not going to embroil that war. But an immediate retaliation is allowed. Just bomb this shit out of them. We don't care. Just bomb them. Don't intervene. Just bomb them if they dare to attack us. Yes, we should have a strong policy. And here comes the topic of foreign policy. The topic is that currently Europe is debating with the whole world as independent states. Their political capital, which they have to expand, is generally very small. And thus, we are kind of obeyed to the supremacy of the US. In a common foreign policy, so one confederal Europe, will imply not being an enemy to the US, but being firstly equal partners to the US supremacy. So we're not going to contest the US in the supremacy because we're both Western countries, we're both Western-oriented nations. So our goals and objectives align quite strongly. But we're not going to abide by the US rules.
In terms of foreign policy, you just mentioned, obviously the Confederacy will have a common foreign policy to a certain extent. How do you balance the inherent differences that each state might have in terms of, for example, if the Confederacy now decides that it's a foreign policy to stop trading with Russia, for example, stop any trade with Russia. Obviously, some states within Europe are more dependent on Russia's products than others. So it will be easier, for example, for the sake of argument, it might not be true, but for example, let's say Italy is more dependent on Russian products, whereas Poland is not. How do you balance that decision? How do you make that decision as a confederacy to stop trade with Russia, knowing that Italy will be more affected by that rather than Poland? Wouldn't you at some point reach a gridlock in decision making? Because obviously, I don't know whether that confederacy concept you have will have veto powers with the states. No.
It should work mainly like the current US system is working, where you have a parliamentary system where you vote in your policies, but with very limited power. And the stronger would be a Senate-based system, where you will need, for acts like these you mentioned, you will need an absolute majority, or a majority of, let's say, 60% or 65%. So you will avoid the dictatorship of the majority. But still, you will always have cases where you will have a strong minority that's going to get negatively impacted. But when it comes to the benefits of the state as a whole, if 65 or 70% vote in favor, then yes, the 30% should oblige. I mean, that's the case for nation states up to this point. Like some districts always get the bad end of the stick when it comes to a foreign policy. So you have a district in the United States that's producing some type of steel, and then the US makes an agreement with China to allow more selling of that steel. Well, that state and district gets ruined, but if it's in the interest of the vast majority, not just the majority, the vast majority, then that state has to adapt. Like that's the clear case. So the superstate should have some authority, and especially in foreign policy and military, it should have the ability to embargo. Because if it doesn't, then each state will practically not be different from current day Europe. You gain the benefits of a superstate, then you get the disadvantage of a superstate as well. You may want a system of absolute autonomy. So I don't care what's happening in the world. I'm not going to embargo anyone, like Switzerland. But at the same time, you don't get any of the advantages. So the border countries that usually are the more scared of attacks are also the ones that their economic interests are more aligned with their neighbors that are outside the states, have a double-edged sword and shield. So on one side, they get the massive benefit of the direct defense. So the Netherlands, in theory, has nothing to fear at the moment by anyone. Even if Europe didn't exist, even NATO didn't exist. If Russia were to attack, it has to fight through so many states before it comes to the Netherlands to be a threat. So the Netherlands have way more reasons to not support any embargo than Poland will have. So my argument is that, yes, the states on the borders will get the band end of the stick, but at the same time, they're getting the benefits of when it comes to potential war. So it's a give and take. Now, in foreign policy, the other massive argument that I like about the Confederal system is that as a whole, in my personal opinion, it should act as a non-intervening green state, like what Switzerland is to the rest of Europe. So I practically don't care what's happening in the world. I'm trading with anyone. You need guns, take guns. You need guns, take guns. You need oil, take oil, and so forth, with some, of course, limitations. You don't sell to terrorists. But outside of that, it's free trade, be the loving body of everybody, and just have very strong border control. So you allow the trade, you allow immigrants coming in a regulatory manner, but outside of that, no, the border stops here and you don't enter. I'm okay with everybody. And because of the size of Europe and the location of Europe, no one has an incentive to be aggressive against Europe. And especially in the world we're coming that India and China are becoming much stronger, each individual European states that currently have some political authority will in 30 years practically have very little political authority, such as Germany and France, where India, South Africa, and Brazil and Argentina will eventually overtake them. A Confederal States of Europe might not be the strongest economy in the world, but as a whole, it will be one of the top by far. So we'll still have quite strong political capital to expend. And to continue its alliance with the US and the EU by themselves will always constitute the vast majority of the world's wealth. So that's why that's the argument in regards to foreign policy and the military. Now, in the next video, we're going to talk about the concept of lingua franca and maybe the economy, and later on we're going to talk about the right to succeed and the concept of decentralization. Thank you for watching this video. Add any questions you have. If you have enough, we're going to do a Q&A session. Thank you for watching.